Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you at the FP&A Trends Webinar. My name is Olga Rudakova. I'm a FP&A professional, data storytelling trainer, and dashboard design consultant. I'm happy to facilitate this event for you tonight. Today's topic is a new age of zero-based budgeting. And I'm very happy to see that many of you want to revise and refresh the old known concept of zero-based budgeting. That is why we have so many registrations tonight, over 900, coming from 60 different countries. What we can expect tonight? First of all, we will speak about key concepts and definitions related to zero-based budgeting. We'll speak about lessons learned from implementing ZBB. We'll have Mondelez case study on future back planning. Besides that, we will cover critical success factors for zero-based budgeting. We'll speak about technology enablers, and certainly we'll have conclusions, recommendations, and Q&A session. So you already can send your questions through Q&A box. Let me start by introducing our speakers for the evening. So please join me on the camera, and I will start our introductions with Brad Farrow. Brad Farrow is Commercial Finance Director at Mondelez. He's finance leader with over 15 years of experience. He's a strategic and accountable business partner. Brad, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Our second speaker tonight will be Enrique Rodriguez, Finance Director for Headquarters and Procurement at Walgreens Boots Alliance. Enrique is Finance Director and Business Leader with over 15 years of experience. He has experience with leading departments of finance up to 40 professionals. Enrique, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
And the last speaker tonight will be Greg Volpe, Product Marketing Director at Workday. Greg has over 26 years of experience behind him, focused on working with FP&A teams to transform their planning processes with leading technology. Greg, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Olga, and looking forward to speaking with everyone today.
And that brings us to thanking our technology sponsor for the evening, Workday. Workday helps you solve your greatest business challenges. Besides that, I would like to introduce FP&A Trends Group to you as well. You are attending this webinar, so it means that you know about our digital community. Besides that, we have our face-to-face community, which is presented in 30 cities, 16 countries, and 4 continents. More than that, we offer a broad spectrum of education, research, and consulting resources. So it's certainly worth exploring FP&A Trends Group even more. What you can expect tonight, it will be 1-hour webinar having 2 interactive polls in it. Besides that, you can send questions to our panelists, and presentation is already available in the handouts section. Besides that, you will receive the recording of the event and a presentation after the meeting. Please don't rush to leave after the end of the session. Take part in our brief survey because your feedback is very valuable to us. Let's stop for a second and think a bit why we speak about a new age of zero-based budgeting. Traditional budgeting process has been around forever, over 100 years. Zero-based budgeting is hardly a new concept either. It has been invented in 1970s and has proven quite effective in cost management and cost controlling. Many companies rely on these up to these days, but today we speak about much broader concept than zero-based budgeting. It can be expanded to zero-based everything, to zero-based FP&A, when we actually apply this mindset to understanding our business drivers and to strategic allocation of the resources. I would like to continue with a quote from our CEO and founder for FP&A Trends Group, Larissa Melnichuk. In her article, she said that zero-based FP&A helps to remove unnecessary fat from traditional plans and forecasts, and to enhance the understanding of key business and value drivers. This is an exercise that is managed by FP&A, but relates to the entire organization. If you want to read the full article, the link is available to you here at the bottom of the slide. But now let me turn on our panelists to discuss with them pros and cons of zero-based budgeting, how it can be implemented these days, and how modern technology can help us overcome all these struggles and problems associated with zero-based budgeting. We will start with our first speaker for the evening, Brad Farrell. Brad will be speaking about Mondelez case study, Future Back Planning. Brad, it is yours.
All right. Thank you, Olga, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who have joined. Thank you for joining today. I want to spend a few moments to talk about really the different areas of ZBB, and also, you know, the traditional and, you know, even some that we've even recently been using in terms of ZBB are a bit even outdated at times. So we'll go through a bit of those pitfalls, and then also I can recommend a few areas that can maybe help you as you integrate some of these elements. So let's first, you know, and I think Olga set it up the right way. Traditional budgeting is as old as time, and this is really where we consider any new expenses by keeping the base intact. Okay, we all know that this is this has been augmented by ZBB, which is where we analyze every expense one by one. Okay, this is all good stuff. And the cost transparency that comes with this, it promotes throughout the organization and helps everyone understand the rationale behind budgeting decisions and fosters accountability. There's also efficiencies, right? We know that ZBB forces organizations to critically examine every expense, no matter how small it is. It scrutinizes and identifies and eliminates unnecessary cost. It also helps the organizations to reallocate resources. All right, ZBB can also lead to reallocating low impact areas to high impact areas. By reallocating funds based on a current need and performance, companies can optimize investments. All right, this is a good thing. You can also focus on value creation. Instead of assuming that all expenses should be carried forward from the previous year, ZBB requires departments to justify how their spending will create value for the organization. This shifts focus of a mindset, right, in terms of value creation. And also performance measurement, right? ZBB encourages and establishes clear performance KPIs and metrics for each budget item. So these are the fundamentals of ZBB, but I would also argue that there are some drawbacks or constraints to the traditional ZBB process. Some of these constraints are on the screen here. It can be resource intensive. The classic ZBB process can be time consuming and resource intensive. Starting each budget from scratch every year, looking through all expenses, may strain resources and disrupt business operations. It also could be a lack of flexibility in this process. It may not accommodate rapidly changing business environment or conditions, right? Market shifts all the time. It might be in response to unforeseen events. Also, there could be difficulty in prioritization. ZBB may struggle to prioritize expenses effectively, as all items must be justified equally. And this can lead to maybe inefficient allocation of resources. Also, short-term focus. Because ZBB is typically implemented on an annual basis, it may encourage a short-term focus on cost cutting rather than long-term value creation. Also complexity, right? All of our organizations are too complex, too large. And in this instance, it may find the classic ZBB difficult to implement due to the sheer volume of expenses and the need to coordinate across numerous departments and divisions. Okay, so I will then advocate that you have a look at something different, a new approach. And this is the way that we approach budgeting and forecasting at Mondelez. And we look at it more in terms of empowerment versus a clawback of funds, thinking of it as a carrot versus a stick, okay? So future back planning requires that you first define a future vision, okay? You define some 10-year, 15-year out vision, which is ambitious, it's transformational, and it contains the right priorities which you should progress against as a business. Once this vision is set, the idea of future back planning is to identify what the company needs to do now to achieve this vision. The process is across all functions. This isn't just a financial exercise, but rather strategic blue sky thinking. For instance, if we wanted to expand into new categories, what would they be? What would be required to reset our gross margin? What would it take to capture 5 extra points of market share within a specific channel where we play? How would we need to reorganize ourselves to achieve this? What is the right level of marketing spending? And forget about the typical ZBB process of taking the prior year and only justifying new costs, but what if you were to distort your investment to certain brands or businesses? How would you build it from the bottoms up? So this is really defining the future, and this is a very much a business-focused conversation. Strategic business drivers, okay? Next is to assess the financial situation, right? We have to understand what the financials are behind this and have clear KPIs. So we need to create targets to hold the business accountable to achieve this vision. So what are the KPIs which will define our success or our failure? It's our job then to ruthlessly challenge the assumptions of the plan and make sure investments are distorted appropriately across the right levers of the business. Establishing growth targets, there will be clear trade-offs which the business will need to make in order to make that come true. It forces budget owners and business leaders to make drastic choices now on how they will grow, or else they won't deliver. At the end, it comes down to empowering the team. And then the last element here is the plan, do, check, act. Okay, this is a classic Six Sigma concept, which leaves room for corrective action when a plan is coming to life and bringing continuous progress or continuous improvement into the ambition. We know the future is unknown, but with the work the teams have put into the plan, the growth mindset and forced choices create a behavior that I believe augments the traditional ZBB process. As you can see, this model is a slight twist from the tradition. Instead of looking behind for what is wrong, it positions the organization looking forward to the right way to organize budgets around the right and common goal. Instead of looking back to decide what shouldn't be there, we look to the future to see what should be. It's not necessarily about spending less, but spending smarter. Okay, so of course, the last slide is benefits. We need to realize the benefits of this concept. So what does it do? It achieves all the goals of ZBB: cost transparency, resource reallocation, value creation, etc. But it minimizes the constraints. Okay, so instead of being seen as resource intensive, you get better engagement from your business partners. Instead of short term, it achieves a multi-year business planning and defines investments required for growth. Instead of difficult to prioritize, it provides clear KPIs and success indicators. Instead of lack of flexibility, the plan, do, check, act concept allows for flexibility to pivot in another direction, and also to identify the root cause of what's going wrong. So if you're worried about your organization being too complex, the approach can also help you reassess the org structure to achieve the ambition which your team has defined. So the bottom line, if you know where you are going, you will make better decisions here and now. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Olga.
Thank you so much, Brad, for your presentation. And indeed, knowing where you're going and using ZBB can certainly help you achieve the desired results. Thank you for this example. And it brings us to the first polling question of the evening, which by the way, I will ask you, Brad, to comment on after we finish. And the first polling question relates to whether we have already implemented zero-based budgeting. So let's see what our audience has to say. The question is, have you implemented zero-based budgeting in your organization? And the options are yes, successfully, yes, with challenges, no, but considering it, and no, and not even interested. So I'm actually very curious. I'm wondering who is joining us tonight, how far you are in experimenting with zero-based budgeting concept. So let's see. Have you implemented zero-based budgeting in your organization? Yes, successfully. Yes, but with challenges. No, considering it. No, not interested. Let me close this poll and share results with you. What do we see here? Actually quite interesting. 60% of the audience have not yet implemented ZBB, but considering it. Another 25% have already implemented it with some challenges. 10 have implemented it without challenges, and only 5% are not interested in implementing it at this stage. Brad, what do you think? Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. And again, I think those who haven't implemented it, it's probably for some of the reasons which we talked about, right? Some of those constraints. It's very difficult and time consuming. So, but I think it's absolutely worth considering, 100%. So I think these the folks around.
Indeed, we certainly have the right audience tonight to actually speak about pros and cons of zero-based budgeting, and we'll certainly get there very soon. But before that, let's have a short discussion all together. So please join me here on the camera, and we will speak about how can organizations effectively align their strategic objectives with the principles of zero-based budgeting. So strategy versus zero-based budgeting. How can it be aligned? And let me start with you, Enrique. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a very important question to ask. And one of the great benefits of ZBB is that it allows you, it allows top-level goals to be implemented into the budgeting process, because you have the ability to tie them up directly with the functional areas of the organization, where eventually costs can be grouped and then measured against specific results and the expectation that you set up as an organization. So I think it's a perfect mix.
Perfect. That's indeed the way how it's supposed to work. And let me move on to you, Greg. What do you think? How can we align our strategy and zero-based budgeting?
Yeah, so I'll speak from a technology perspective, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar. But completely agree with Enrique in terms of how that aligns. But just by the nature of new modern technology, which is unified, not siloed, everyone's kind of working within one unified platform. The strategic objectives of zero-based budgeting will always be aligned with the strategic objectives, because the metrics, the strategic plan will always be able to be viewed in real time by users of ZBB, and so that should facilitate a much more efficient and effective process for implementing that.
Indeed, we need to have working process in order to make these two things align. And back to you, Brad. I know that you have already answered this question to a certain extent through your presentation, but if you can add something, how can we effectively align strategic objectives with principles of zero-based budgeting?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, again, I think aligning it to the strategic objectives of where the business wants to go. It has to be, expenses have to be there for a reason, and that is to grow the business, okay? There's one other tip that we use at Mondelez, which I left out of the presentation, which would be great for this. It's also a check and balance between the growth and the actual expense growth. So at Mondelez, we call it HOG, or half of growth. So if your expenses are growing at half of your growth rate in your top line, so let's say your net revenues are growing 5%, your overheads should only be growing 2.5%. So this is a check and balance for you to make sure that you are also placing constraints around your expenses very clearly, and also growing your profitability, the bottom line of the organization throughout the growth agenda of your company. So that's another tip there.
Thank you so much for that. HOG is a simple and very strong principle. I'm pretty sure it will be remembered by many after this event. And it brings us nicely to the second presentation of the evening, and we will speak about success factors. So let me move on and give a word to Enrique Rodriguez. Enrique will be speaking about zero-based budgeting, critical success factors. Enrique, microphone is yours.
Thank you very much again, Olga. So first, before getting into the critical success factor, I think it was very important for us to talk about ideally what are the pros and cons that I have identified in the areas or the instances where I have been directly involved or led implementation with ZBB before. Starting with the pros, absolutely, I think it's paramount. One of the major advantages of the implementation is cost control. ZBB absolutely helps you identify and eliminate unnecessary. It gives you the right level of accountability, and it gives you the power as a financial professional and business partner to be able to question or have the business and the owners of the budget justify specifically the rationale behind those quote unquote hidden costs or hidden expenses that they're also all very much coveted in the past. Switching over to resource allocation, these is absolutely important as well in terms of ensuring that the resources are correctly allocated to the areas with the highest strategic impact. Ultimately, every single budget owner has been prone to try to justify, try to be very protective of their budget in vis-a-vis the other areas or the other functions, and this resource allocation principle or advantage of the implementation gives you the flexibility of ensuring that the right resources are going to be allocated to the right areas that have their highest impact. Switching over to transparency, as I mentioned in the beginning, transparency is another great advantage of ZBB, of any ZBB implementation, providing clear visibility into the spending and enhancing accountability. I do recall a few instances in the past where, as I mentioned, it's oftentimes when you challenge the business partners into the rationale of their budget, they are initially have been surprised because you're opening the door to ask them to justify the resources that they want to in the financial planning process, which probably surprised them at the beginning when you're implementing ZBB. Flexibility as well is another great example of great advantage of an implementation, allowing you as a business professional or the finance professional agile adaptation to changing business conditions nowadays in a current inflationary environment where unfortunate events are happening every single day, and it gives ZBB implementation gives you the flexibility to adapt and change and reallocate resources depending on where your priorities are, or even from a geographical where should we restrain resources from one geographical area into other geographic areas, so to speak. Switching over to the cons of a ZBB implementation, I think it's very important for us to be mindful that it's a definitely resource-intensive exercise. ZBB requires substantial time and effort to implement and maintain. I would say that I think putting aside any type of tool that you may have or that you're probably gotta look for if in case you're interested of implementing this. Nevertheless, it does require you a certain amount of time and effort to run I would say a robust implementation. Resistance, as any change in human nature, I mean, employees may resist the rigorous scrutiny of their budget. Everybody's protective about their budget, and resistance can be something that you're going to be faced right on. Short-term focus also is another disadvantage, or I would say main challenge that you run into when implementing ZBB. The short-term focus can lead to a myopic focus on an immediate cost reduction. Everybody wants to try to get the low-hanging fruit. What are the biggest items that you can get from a cost reduction standpoint? But that's the risk of you're running the risk of focusing too much on the short term rather than looking at the growth areas where you would need to be mindful about how deep you can cut and justify the resources for the organization. Last but not least, complexity. The implementation itself can be challenging to implement in large organizations. I think it's very important for us to be mindful about that. With numerous cost centers, I think it's very important to do the work in advance to outline the different cost centers that you have within the organization. We try to be as practical as possible in the implementation. And that leads me into what I would define in the next slide, the critical success factors. Definitely, strong leadership commitment is we top level support and commitment implementation. This is not going to be a finance driven solution. It has to be more than just finance driven. It has to be completely a full adoption and full I would say support from senior leadership of the organization beyond finance to ensure that the implementation itself is going to be successful. Second, you have to have clearly defined objectives, obviously, but you have to establish clear goals and objectives for ZBB to align with the organization's strategic priorities. What are those? What does success look like from an implementation standpoint? What is the specific time frame? You cannot leave it as is without that clear defined objective for the implementation. Also, you need to ensure that you have a full engagement of all stakeholders, including employees and managers at all levels in the budgeting process as well. I think it's obvious, but given how time-intensive resources this process or this implementation would be, also you would have to ensure that you have a comprehensive data analysis. You have to gather accurate and detailed financial data to support the ZBB process. I think it's, again, going back to the pre-work that you need to do prior to thinking about the implementation and ensuring that you have a robust enough data accuracy mentality or philosophy within the organization to avoid the organization to second guess data that you're providing when you're defining the cost centers or the ZBB cost categories that you're going to be overseeing. And last but not least, going back to having clearly defined objectives, but also having a set of developing a key performance indicator set to measure the effectiveness of ZBB. I mean, are you going to be, you would quantify yourself as a successful implementation after managing reduction of 20% in 1 year, or you're going to be achieving managing diminishing the amount of cost center that you have within the organization by 50%. I mean, regardless of what your KPI is, clearly established metrics for adequately measure the success of that. So that leads me to my last slide. I would say, what are the key takeaways that I wanted to share with you as part of a ZBB implementation? Definitely, ZBB is a extremely powerful tool to control costs, allocate resources, and also enhance financial transparency and accountability. When it comes to its challenges, as I mentioned, the pros and cons areas, it requires careful planning, it requires commitment, and but nevertheless, it does provide you substantial short-term and long-term benefits as well. And last but not least, it gives you the flexibility to adapt to changing market conditions and achieve that long-term financial strategy.
Thank you, Enrique, for your presentation and sharing with us success factors, how we can successfully implement zero-based budgeting in our organization. And that is actually connected to our second polling question. I want to ask our audience, what was the biggest challenge you faced during zero-based budgeting implementation? And I know that many of you have not implemented it yet, so just planning to do so. So please answer, what do you expect to be the biggest challenge knowing your organization? So what is the biggest challenge? Resistance from departments, difficulty in value or cost drivers identification, time-consuming process, or lack of executive support. So let's see, what do you consider the biggest challenge on the way to zero-based budgeting? Resistance from departments, difficulty in value or cost drivers identification, time-consuming process, or lack of executive support. Most of you have voted, so I can close the polling result and share the results with you. Quite interesting and almost even distribution. Majority of you, 42%, say that it's time-consuming process. We have certainly discussed that, and it's indeed one of the biggest pitfalls of zero-based budgeting. Second biggest result, 29%, say that it is resistance from departments. Indeed, they need to be involved, and it's a huge work from them as well. 23% believe that it is difficulty in value or cost drivers identification, and only 6% say that it is lack of executive support. Enrique, what do you think? Are you surprised? Does it correspond to your own experience?
I'm not surprised at all. I think it's very in line with what I was expecting from this poll specifically. I think it's before getting the experience of implementing ZBB, that was precisely one of the biggest disadvantages that I was thinking about. But now, having implemented a few times, I would say that I think the time and effort that you spend, it's minimum to the amount of benefit that you would actually get. And once you get into the cadence of instilling that accountability, ownership in your business partner, this is where it starts to become natural, and people are more, I would say, disciplined when new investment or new business cases are presented for approval within the whatever existing financial planning process you have. So I think it's worthwhile. The investment in time and resources is worthwhile, the benefit.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion on that. And it actually nicely brings us to this third discussion, to the second discussion of the evening. We have said that one of the biggest obstacles is being time consuming. That we'll certainly cover in the last presentation tonight, how to make zero-based budgeting much more faster, smoother, and so on. But here I want to discuss how we can overcome this initial resistance from various departments. It's the second most popular problem. So let's start from you, Greg, here. How do you think we can overcome initial resistance from various departments when implementing zero-based budgeting?
Yeah, thanks, Ova. So again, from a technology perspective, I think that a modern technology planning solution, moving away from spreadsheets and maybe other siloed systems, naturally will allow users to collaborate better, right? And that makes things much more effective and reduces resistance, but also allows them to kind of in real time see what their plans are, see what their assumptions are, their drivers from zero-based budgeting standpoint, and be able to collaborate very nicely with other functional areas where there might be some direct correlation with drivers and assumptions that might impact across the functional area. So I think just by the nature of moving to a more modern planning solution, that should reduce a lot of the resistance for this type of process.
Indeed, and that certainly makes sense. And I actually want to pass the word to you, Brad. If you are with us, please join us on the camera as well. So what do you think? How can we overcome this initial resistance from departments? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think actually it was great to see in the polling that executive buy-in was a very small number, because that is, I think, alignment throughout the organization. I think Enrique touched on this point very well. This is the most important. I think we need to have a very clear objective in implementing ZBB, and executive sponsorship and managerial oversight of the process with governance and check-ins, and make sure we are progressing against the goal is key here.
Thank you, Brad. And back to you, Enrique. What can you add to this? How can we overcome resistance from departments?
I would say that one of the topics, one of the measures that we use to overcome that resistance from various departments is ensuring, I mean, I would say influencing or instilling in the organization a sense of transparency. I think from the moment that we start to decompose and analyze the specific zero-based budget cost categories, we were able to instill that level of transparency within the organization. And the benefit, the answering the timeless question, what's in it for me, is at least giving the organization the reassurance that by continuing with the ZBB implementation, in the long term, we would be avoiding any type of having to go through a process where there's a specific cost saving target that everybody needs to adopt regardless of what. I mean, by that level of transparency, you're able to overcome that traditional, this is the target, achieve it. I don't care about how you achieve it, but clearly every single owner within the budget has the specific variables, and you can have a better discussion with your partner in order to ensure, okay, what are the, I mean, you have an open book, and these are the variables that I'm going to be able to cut in order to achieve whatever cost saving target we have.
Thank you. That's certainly a very strong point, and I believe it's very convincing to all the departments we work with. Moving on to our last presentation of the evening, we are going to speak about zero-based budgeting technology enablers. And who else can speak about that better than our speaker, Greg Volpe? Greg, it is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Olga. Yeah, and thank you very much. So let's talk about zero-based budgeting in the context of technology, and obviously taking so much value from what Brad and Enrique just talked about. So first and foremost, you know, the world is changing, as we all know, right? And global markets are continuing to evolve rapidly with some degree of unpredictability, continued economic uncertainty, and certainly industry disruption. And many organizations are finding it challenging to navigate this changing world as their primary business drivers and assumptions are constantly changing, right? The ones that we used to rely on are no longer relevant from year to year. So against this backdrop, many organizations are finding that old school budgeting approaches, Olga mentioned this up front, their reliance on prior forecasting methods, out-of-date business drivers, and planning technology solutions no longer work as well as they once did. So this is why many businesses are considering zero-based budgeting. Enrique just talked, one of the key takeaways was about adapting, ZBB provides much more flexibility to adapt to changing market conditions. But this is why many organizations are considering ZBB as a leading practice, as well as investing in more modern technology solutions. So on my next slide, let's talk about real quickly some of the challenges that that we see, and certainly kind of lead off of what Enrique and Brad had talked about as well. So first, as mentioned, old school budgeting approaches, along with out-of-date business drivers, are no longer work as they once did. And because of this, many organizations are considering implementing zero-based budgeting, right, as we saw with some of the polls, or the process of starting from zero. However, and as we saw this in the poll, and as Brad mentioned up front as well, many also believe zero-based budgeting is too cumbersome, manual to implement, and time-consuming, as we all talked about. And that's somewhat true. And since many of today's prevalent planning solutions, especially spreadsheets and other siloed systems, are limited in scope and do not support zero-based budgeting effectively. Unfortunately, many organizations have been slow to invest in and migrate to modern planning technology. On the next slide, we see a few metrics from a recent survey that we looked at. So 88% of executives agree that flexible and adaptive planning tools or systems or platforms are extremely or very important in this ever-changing business climate. However, 73% of the orgs are still pulling data together manually or running forecasts and scenarios offline with older technology, like spreadsheets or maybe some other proprietary systems. Unfortunately, unless FP&A is armed with flexible, agile planning, as Enrique had alluded to, technology to support methods like ZBB, this gap is only going to get worse over time. So on the next slide, let's take a quick look at some of the value points that we see from on zero-based budgeting. So I'll go through these quickly, as again Brad and Enrique touched on from their perspective of what the value was. So first, it can utilize up-to-date business drivers and assumptions, taking into account market and ever-changing economic changes. It drives company-wide collaboration. We talked about this in one of our last discussion points, by not only identifying key and relevant drivers, but also critical correlations of these drivers across different functional areas. Zero-based budgeting will also allow for more support for full financial planning, meaning that this type of budgeting can not only support expense line items, but also revenue and even balance sheet items. Continuous planning with zero-based budgeting, meaning continuing to use this ongoing throughout a year, allows for enhanced business performance, monitoring, and plan adjustments. And all of this value can be enhanced and supported effectively by investing in a modern planning technology solution. So on the next slide, let's talk about what this new planning technology, or what this new age planning technology is, and what you should be looking for if you're planning to invest or migrate to this type of technology. So first of all, this technology is primarily cloud-based unified platform, which will provide real-time data updates, company-wide collaboration, and support a unified business driver environment, as I discussed kind of in the previous discussion points. It will support full automation of many of the manual work processes that we encounter with spreadsheets and other legacy planning systems, like data aggregation, reconciliation, and integration with other source systems. It will support flexible what-if scenarios and versions to ensure an organization's ZBB budget, or ZBB, is strategic by utilizing different drivers for different scenarios, as an example. It will allow FP&A teams to remain agile, flexible, and insightful during times of economic uncertainty and volatility. And finally, it has to be ease of use. This is critical. It has to be ease of use, so that full collaboration across the entire organization can be realized and the utilization of zero-based budgets are more effective. Some customer examples that we talk to many customers, obviously, as we work with them. For example, a manufacturer of outdoor living equipment now has more accurate and data-driven decisions during changing times by utilizing up-to-date drivers. Or as an example, speaking with a publishing and media advertising firm who moved to ZBB, they are using more accurate sales and cost drivers, and this has allowed them at a much more granular level. And this has allowed them to be able to more accurately compare budget against weekly forecasts and change drivers as they need throughout the year. So finally, on my next slide, this is just a quick example of zero-based budgeting revenue drivers using a modern cloud-based planning technology solution. These types of solutions should provide ease of use and flexibility for planning stakeholders. We talked about ease of use is a really key factor here. Really to update drivers quickly at any level of granularity. View updated reports, or in this example, visual analytics in real time, as well as on-the-fly versions, and et cetera, as we talked about in the previous slide. The end result is that migrating to a modern cloud-based planning solution, combined with implementing thoughtful zero-based budgeting approach, will ultimately provide more accurate plans and real-time analysis. So with that, I will pass it back to you, Olga.
Thank you so much, Greg, for your presentation and for sharing how technology can be helpful not only in zero-based budgeting implementation as such, but in value drivers identification as well. It actually brings us to the last discussion of the evening. Before we start this discussion, I want to thank the audience for sending so many interesting questions. Thank you for them. You can still continue to do so. We'll start Q&A session in a couple of minutes, but meanwhile, dear panelists, join me on the camera and we will have the last discussion. So the question goes like that. How have you seen the adoption of zero-based budgeting influence cross-functional collaboration and decision-making process? So really, how zero-based budgeting affect our collaboration and processes? And let me start here with you, Brad. What do you think?
Yeah, the adoption of zero-based budgeting, it is tense, and there are some trade-offs that need to be made, right? Enrique touched on this, that there's, you want to come across as empowering the organization to make decisions, and not you're there to take their money, right? And again, as I said, it's a carrot versus a stick. I think it's all about how it's done. So the cross-functional collaboration, again, should be based on business growth, on clear drivers, and on getting rid of the waste in terms of our expenses. There should not be, a tense relationship between finance and the business. This is all, we're all doing the same thing and doing it for the betterment of the organization and in the end. And everyone's bonus, right, at the end of the day. This is all things we should be aligned on. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, for this answer. And let me move on to you, Enrique. What do you think? How zero-based budgeting affects collaboration and decision-making processes?
Yeah, but I think overall, by definition, ZBB overall requires a mandate cross collaboration. You cannot have a ZBB without cross collaboration. So it's part of the definition, in my opinion. So definitely influence the results, but it's a mandate in order to implement ZBB, to have that cross collaboration and ultimately actually expedite the decision-making process, because you're not entrenched into your own position. This is my budget. Get away, you finance evil partner, but actually you're collaborating and you're forcing your finance partner to understand and to have a better understanding actually of the business drivers and so on.
Thank you. Indeed, if functions were living in silos before that, zero-based budgeting would not let them remain like that. And let's move on to you, Greg. What do you think? How have you seen zero-based budgeting affecting collaboration and decision-making?
Yeah, moving from Enrique, who talks about mandate, this, a modern planning technology, again, from the technology perspective, will just facilitate that, right? Because now everybody is all in a unified platform. Yes. Everyone's seeing their data. Everyone's being able to, collaborate better with correlated drivers and assumptions. And just by the nature of a modern unified planning technology, that will facilitate the whole process of much more effectively.
Indeed. Thank you all for your answers, and that eventually brings us to Q&A session. Thank you to all of you who have been sending your questions. We won't be able to answer all of them right now, but don't worry, we'll send the remaining questions to our panelists and expect them to be answered in writing at some point. So let's start with questions, and many of them were coming during your presentation. So here is a question related specifically to you, Enrique. So it goes like that. I understand that you do zero-based budgeting for many years. How was your hit rate of budget to actuals for sales, operational expenditure, and EBIT?
What was can you please repeat a little bit the last part?
How was your budget to actual?
Oh,
for main metrics, for main business metrics.
It was a terrible hit rate at the beginning. So I think it's obviously, it's expected that you're gonna have very very, I would say, large amount of surprisings when you're starting this journey. Ultimately, it's a continuous improvement type of process where you're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to be able to get the benefit of the low-hanging fruits, that obscure cost category that you're finally uncovering, that is going to be ultimately the one that you're going to be able to reduce dramatically without any type of resistance or challenge. But overall, the first years of implementing ZBB, the hit rate was awful. I mean, transparently speaking.
Indeed, and maybe that zero-based budgeting is not that much about hit rate as such, right? It's about business management to a certain extent. So really understanding how to change, how to work with this gap.
Yes, I think it's, for me, one of the great benefits is actually getting the data speaks for itself. I mean, it's less the passion about your budget. It's more, what are the drivers behind the budget, and how do those drivers actually strategic priorities of the business. So that's, I mean, enhancing transparency, enhancing visibility, enhancing cross-functional collaboration. Those are the great benefits that we have.
Indeed. Thank you for this answer. Our next question goes directly to you, Brad, and relates to granularity of zero-based budgeting. So what is the unit of granularity should one use to think of expenses in zero-based budgeting? So how granular you go? And there are some suggestions here: strategic initiatives or processes or people. So really understanding those elements.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on your time horizon. Okay, so as I was speaking, 10 years out, you have a bit of a wiggle room. Okay, so you don't have to be as specific 10 years out versus next year. Next year should be much more granular. You should have each of the line items and specific to the investments you're making, also the people required to deliver that plan, and the organization based around that. So I think you have to be very specific in the next year, less specific outgoing, and leave room for that flexibility, right? Make sure you have a bit of room in your budgets, even for the next year, to make changes, because you know that things aren't going to develop as planned. Like I said, the hog concept: if you start growing less than you planned, then you're gonna have a compression at some areas of your P&L and have to absorb that extra cost. So I would say 1 year out, be very specific on what you're going to spend, when you're going to spend it, and that will leave you better off.
Right. Thank you for this answer. And by the way, there were many questions asking, oh, can you please ask Brad to repeat hug concept? We will be certainly sharing the recording of this event with every one of you. So I'm pretty sure that hug concept will be one of the most rewatched parts of the webinar as well. And meanwhile, let me move on to you, Greg, this question that relates to your area, and that goes like that. How can we ensure that zero-based budgeting process remains flexible to adapt to changes in the business environment? So in simple words, if everything around us changes, how we can make sure that zero-based budgeting still works?
Well, I think by just continuously using it throughout a year, right? So that's what regardless if it's zero-based budgeting or any other type of process or method, really zero-based budgeting is really the best kind of approach. But regardless of what you're using, to continuously do that, forecast when needed throughout a plan, throughout a year, as different market changes. I mean, the market changes constantly, could be even quarter to quarter, or even more frequently. What we've seen is many customers kind of just implementing that more, and from a zero-based budgeting perspective, changing drivers and assumptions. And from a technology perspective, it becomes a lot easier when you're using a unified platform with real data updates, with the ability to generate new versions of your plan, be able to generate new versions of assumptions and drivers. That's really kind of makes it more effective and allows organizations to be much more flexible during this time of volatility.
Thank you. Certainly makes sense. And it actually brings us to the last question of the event. It will be a question to all of you, and I'll start with you, Enrique. The question goes like that. What are some ways to measure success or effectiveness of zero-based budgeting implementation? Can we measure it somehow? And if yes, how can we do that? Enrique.
I think, yes, that's a great question. And I would say that the first measure of success of implementing ZBB is the amount of time that you actually spend. I mean, establishing a baseline of how much time does it take for the entire organization to plan for a budget in a regular and a normal year. Let's say that you spend X amount of hours throughout the day, and you have to be very mindful about the measuring of that amount of hours. I mean, it's not only top level, but all levels across the organization that are clearly focused on the budgeting process. I know that it's probably a daunting activity, but I would say that that would be the baseline to use and compare that, and probably set yourself for we're going to focus on diminishing that X amount of hours by 20%, let's say. So after the ZBB implementation, I would bet you whatever you want that you're going to be able to achieve that goal by reducing the amount of hours that you're going to be spending in a financial planning process on this matter.
Indeed, indeed. Let me move on to you, Brad. What do you think? How can we measure effectiveness of zero-based budgeting?
That's great. I think it's when you start to see your business partners. So if you have a business partner that comes to you and says, hey, Enrique, I actually want to shift this around. I don't like where this is. I don't think this is getting most of our money. I think we should move it here. And you can say, yes, perfect. Let's do that. And we'll try something new. We'll try something different with that money. I think when you start to see that mindset shift and that ownership, that's massive. And I think it's worth every bit of time spent on the ZBB after that happens. And that way, it's an organic process. It's no longer a finance-led, finance-driven process, but it's organic and it happens regardless.
Thank you. Thank you for this answer. And moving on to you, Greg, what do you think? How can we measure efficiency of zero-based budgeting?
Yeah, from a process standpoint, I mean, I'll leave it to the experts of Enrique and Brad to, talk and mention what they did. From a technology perspective, it's just really facilitating the whole process, utilization, and having executives. The biggest success that we always hear from organizations of how did the deployment of your modern technology solution go? And they said, well, we measure it by some executives or more people logging in and doing some self-service analytics, and in zero-based budgeting perspective, doing self-service analytics on the result, or looking at assumptions or drivers. So it's really just about the utilization and deployment that you see, and people kind of asking the proper questions about ZBB. So that's how we kind of measure success from our perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your answers, actually covering this topic from 3 different angles. I really liked it. And it brings us to the last bit of the event. We actually, at the very end, what is left to me is only to invite our audience to the 2 upcoming events. One still in October on mastering the art and science of value-adding FP&A, and another one in November on real-time and continuous planning. What does it involve? Beside that, let me share with you our FP&A Trends Maturity Model, that is a self-assessment tool that can be accessed on our webpage. Big thank you to Workday, our sponsor for tonight. Workday helps you solve your greatest business challenges. For all of you who are looking for a way to connect to us, to FP&A Trends community, there are multiple ways to do so. Please don't leave right away. Fill in our small survey. Your feedback is really important for us. Thank you all for being here, for taking part of the event. The biggest thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your insights and wisdom. See you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.